Mournful Wanderer, Chapter 1. Even in mourning, Alice Bloomington remained tranquil, almost as though she somehow suspected that her son hadn't truly perished from the world. Most astonishingly, her gaze stayed linear, focused, and without tension. Latent with regret, Alice was perfectly motionless, never even once swaying her legs. The tender sentiments of grief, although quite potent, only loosely entered her heart. They violently attacked her resilient nature, occasionally even penetrating it, but she always managed to repel them, albeit only momentarily. She grasped her diary in her hands, gently stroking its soft edges. Leisurely tilting her head, Alice's eyes drifted towards her pale fingertips. Her moist palms firmly attached themselves to the withered pages, the pressure steadily increasing. Caught between states of vitality and fragility, her lips quivered as she turned the pages, directly above which emerged the soft creases within her jawline. Gazing at the damp scribblings, Alice experienced a sense of nostalgia, accompanied by insights of immense profoundness, vitality, and self-reflection, three qualities that had only recently returned to her endurable complexion. Not yet certain of her exact intentions, Alice gazed upon the words that she had written, taking in almost every detail, regardless of significance. The longer she gazed upon the words, the more they started to take on a life of their own, eventually transforming into images. At first, the images were empty voids, only resembling vague outlines of the recollections that she had imparted to the diary. But after several moments, color started to fill the empty voids, imparting within them a solidarity that could not be matched by any conceivable repetition. As Alice continued reading, her mind started to meld with the words on the page. Rather than perceiving the carefully constructed words, she saw the images that they so desperately attempted to describe, the first one being that of a garden. Once considered to be her safe haven, the garden represented everything that was good about the world. It was a clean and innocent place. Many a day Alice had roamed through the intoxicating enclosure, almost always while singing songs that her father had imparted to her. Flowers sprang up out of the soil, blooming with an intensity that even the angels in heaven could appreciate. A gentle breeze, one found only in the generous confines of nature, swept through the green grass, its only purpose being to evoke a sense of peaceful tranquility. Upon turning to the next page of her diary, Alice saw the faint outline of a human being. The outline, vague though it was, brought a sense of innocence to the garden. While scanning through the thick line of text, Alice homed in on one particular passage, which read, "He is such a small boy for his age. Like his father before him, he is calm and without worry, qualities that I've always lacked, in spite of my best efforts to acquire them. Day by day, hour by hour, he grows paler, weaker, and less attentive to my undying affections. The doctor says he will get better, but so far I'm not so sure. He has said that about many other people, a great number of whom never recovered." While gazing through the vast sea of expressive thoughts, Alice discovered, almost by sheer proxy, that the words on the page had attached themselves to her visual acuities, further blurring the line between physical and psychological realities. Previously in a state of complete agony, Alice's lips started to incurve around her chin, almost forming a gentle expression of sentimentality. Bereaved though she was, Alice still believed, albeit deep down, that not all hope had been lost. Even before the sun pierced the delicate fragrances of the garden, the lines encompassing the vague outline started to stretch into the silhouette of a diminutive entity, potentially that of a small child. Not to be confused with a lifeless shadow, the silhouette moved with a great amount of swiftness and precision, never slowing down for even one moment. Alice, in contrast, remained perfectly entranced within the moment of blissful serenity, only taking very light breaths. Alice was determined to visualize her son within her mind, irrespective of the outcome. Something inside of her, perhaps an undiscovered parchment of reluctance, prevented her from truly visualizing him as she had always remembered. She could see him in a manner of speaking, but his features, with the possible exception of his hands, remained void, formless, and without dimension. Still but a shadow from the recent past, he roamed through the garden, blissfully ignorant of the many cruelties of the world, including the tender sting of death, an aspect of living that encroached upon him with every proceeding journal entry. Those entries, Alice told herself, would never be visited again. Rather than viewing life as it was, cold, cruel, and unforgiving, Alice preferred to focus on the more pleasant aspects of existence, such as the gentle dawning of new life. So long as she visualized the garden within her mind, nothing could tear her away from her sweet boy. Although still somewhat vague, the features of his face started to become slightly more palatable, insofar as they started to take on an aura of innocence. A small jawline emerged from the vagueness of the silhouette, the bones only partially visible. They were pale, white, and worst of all, susceptible to the cruelties of nature. On the surface he appeared to be strong, robust, and healthy, but below the surface Alice could already detect the maladies that would eventually claim his life. Just a few weeks more, and all would be over. Alice wanted to reach out to him, to reach through the pages of the diary, but the written record could not be altered, changed, or overruled by any human force. Following several moments of stagnation, during which almost all wind left the peaceful landscape, he turned his head towards the glimmering sun, his pale eyes finally becoming visible. His gaze was unaware, innocent, and without worry. Had the weather been colder, he would have covered his sensitive gaze, and had it been hotter, the sweat from his nostrils would have prevented him from tasting even the slightest bit of comfort. The weather, it seemed, was perfectly attuned with his desires. As the day went on, however, all light within his eyes vanished. All at once the bright sky was suddenly overtaken by various shadows, the bulk of them sinister in nature. Always perfectly on schedule, the cruel waves of destiny had intervened with his contentment, once and for all destroying any hope of having a future. Sooner than previously anticipated, the image of the garden started to fade from Alice's view, only to eventually be replaced by a far more opaque image. After turning to the next portion of the diary, the garden folded back into the prior edifices of the recorded documents, taking the last visible traces of her son along with it. At first, Alice saw nothing but the further outreaches of darkness. For the very first time, the words within the diary could not adequately describe the surroundings. The handwriting, as opposed to being neat, calm, and confident, was uneven and chaotic. The thoughts, instead of being calm and collected, were incoherent without perception. They moved back and forth between sanity and insanity, until finally entering a state of unintelligible chaos. Amongst the unintelligible chaos, Alice finally managed to imagine faint traces of an image. Out of the precarious darkness, a gentle spark started to take form, the precise origin of which remained unspecified. The spark fluttered with an uncanny amount of intensity, not only capturing the attention of Alice, who continued to gaze at it with an affection that could only be described as lucid, but also the attention of the universe itself. The more her line of focus drifted towards the light, the clearer the image became. Quite suddenly, Alice detected faint waves of heat, along with a slight hissing sound. The hissing synced itself with the fluttering light, no longer a separate entity, but finally one and the same. All around the swaying light, a glass-like structure started to take shape, therefore enclosing the intense heat within a very rigid set of parameters. The lantern sat upon a firm surface, beneath which resided the broken dreams of a grieving mother, who still had not yet come to terms with the various cruelties of the world. Firmly illuminated by the flickering light, the outline of a coffin finally came into view. In contrast with the surfaces that surrounded it, the exterior layers of the coffin were robust, solid, and impervious to the weariness of time. A hand stroked the newly constructed structure, some of the fingers shaking with a great amount of intensity. The fingernails, upon further observation, were strident and feverish, much like the sharp edge points of a dagger, but without the preciseness. Already being somewhat hesitant, and without any precise encouragement to move forward, The fingernails lightly made contact with the surface, only barely scratching the immutable edges of the coffin, across from which echoed the faint cries of a woman who had lost all hope. With very little left to lose, Alice homed in on yet another passage of her diary, which read, "My heart is utterly broken, alone and with no one to comfort me. I stand here in this dark mausoleum, my hand shaking with an intensity that I've never encountered before. Now that my little boy is dead, why is life worth living? Just last week the doctor said that everything would be all right, but only falsehoods escaped his mouth, I have since determined. More than ever before, I realize that no one, excluding God himself, can give me peace of mind. O Lord, with all of your mighty strength, when will you deliver me from this torment? When will you, in your infinite mercy, grant me everlasting peace? Instead of taking him, a young and innocent boy, why didn't you take me? What purpose do you wish me to fulfill?" Alice asked those questions multiple times, never getting an answer. One last time Alice gazed at the coffin, still at a loss for words. The world she had loved, the world she had relished with all her heart, would never again permeate her soft cheekbones. As Alice turned to the next page, the coffin started to fade from her imagination, at first becoming somewhat hazy before finally vanishing altogether, just as if it had never existed to begin with. The next page, oddly enough, was mostly blank. Other than a few scribbles, the bulk of which remained unintelligible, the page was without thought or expression. Somewhere along her journey of self-expression, Alice had decided to extinguish all mournful sentiments from her fragile heart, the outcome mattering very little to her.